Welcome, beloved child of the Most High. You didn't click on this by accident. You were drawn here, called into a moment of truth. Before we begin, if something deep inside your soul is already stirring, comment 777 to declare, yes, this is confirmation. I am chosen. And to every single one of you who has poured into this ministry through Super Thanks, thank you from the depths of my spirit. Your faith, your support, your presence, it all matters more than you know. Whether you've donated or simply whispered a prayer over this message, your light fuels this purpose. Now, lean in closely. Have you ever wondered why people who barely know you can't seem to stop talking about you? Why your name slips into rooms your feet have never entered? Why people who once overlooked you are suddenly obsessed with every move you make? You see, there's something different about you, and they can feel it, even if they can't explain it. But what if I told you that their gossip, their stares, their whispers, all of it has nothing to do with your past and everything to do with your anointing? Here's the truth they'll never admit out loud. You don't just pass by, you leave a spiritual residue. You shift atmospheres. You stir the hidden places in others that they've worked hard to keep buried. You carry a frequency that exposes what's fake, what's fragile, and what's not ready to rise. And that's terrifying for people who haven't done the inner work. So, they talk. They gather in secret corners, build false narratives, and disguise fascination as criticism. But if they're not feeding you, freeing you, or financing your purpose, why are they still so consumed with you? What is it about your presence that makes even your silence feel loud? Because, chosen one, you are not neutral. You're a disruption to every environment that prefers darkness over light. You don't ask for attention, you are the attention. You don't seek validation, you reveal what's real. And while some are drawn to that truth, others run from it, straight into conversations where your name becomes the center of gravity. Let's go even deeper. Did you know that, according to behavioral psychology, people gossip not out of hatred, but out of unconscious admiration or intimidation? That means every word they speak about you, whether in awe or envy, is actually a confession. A confession that your life is a mirror, and they either want to be you, or they're afraid they never could. But here's where it gets spiritual. You didn't choose to be the spotlight. God appointed you. You didn't force the shift. You are the shift. You didn't ask for the influence. You were born carrying it. The same way David was anointed in the presence of his brothers, yet sent back to the field. Your preparation was silent, but your rise is public. And now, the same people who didn't see your worth are trying to decipher your glow. So ask yourself, if a fly keeps returning to the same place, is it because of attraction or infestation? Why are they so infested with you? Because your light exposes what they refuse to confront. Stay with me, because by the end of this message, you won't just know why you're the hot topic. You'll understand why you were destined to be. You'll see that the real reason they can't stop watching is because heaven has already announced your arrival. Let's go there now. God's chosen ones, the real reason. You're the hot topic of every conversation. There's a deeper reason why you're suddenly the center of their conversations, and it has nothing to do with any mistake you've made. In truth, you're not the problem. They're just uncomfortable with the mirror you unknowingly hold up. You, God's chosen one, carry a light so pure and unfiltered that it pierces through the layers of illusion people have spent years building to protect themselves. The real reason you're the hot topic in every conversation is because your presence awakens the shadows. Others have worked tirelessly to silence. You don't need to speak a word or make a scene. Simply entering a room causes a shift in the atmosphere, It's not because you're seeking attention, wearing bold colors, or demanding to be seen. The shift happens because you carry something sacred, truth. It rests on your shoulders like a mantle, invisible to the naked eye, but undeniable to the soul. What they feel when you enter isn't irritation, it's conviction. And for many, conviction is painful when they are not ready to change. Could it be that your very existence is a divine reminder of who they could have been had they not abandoned the truth? This is exactly what happened in Acts 7 when Stephen stood before the Sanhedrin. He didn't shout, he didn't hurl insults, he simply told the truth, filled with the Spirit, but his words cut deep, so deep that they gnashed their teeth and stoned him. Why? Because truth, even spoken gently, exposes what others want hidden. In the same way, you don't attack anyone's wounds, but your very presence reveals that those wounds exist. And that terrifies people who would rather pretend to be whole. As Scripture says in Hebrews 4:12, "For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart." Your spirit, infused with God's word, does exactly that, without needing to speak a syllable. Think about it. How many people do you know who are constantly pretending to be joyful when they're broken inside, pretending to be confident when their heart is ruled by fear, pretending to support others when envy is eating away at them? Then you walk in, not performing, not posturing, just being. That alone unsettles the fragile balance they've created between image and reality. You don't disrupt the room with noise. You disrupt it with authenticity. How can a world built on illusion ever be comfortable with someone who walks in unmasked? And authenticity is a rare language most people have forgotten how to speak. Even celebrities have spoken to this truth. Viola Davis, the award-winning actress known for her raw emotional performances, once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." Yet many run from that very privilege. When you embrace it, you become a silent challenge to everyone still running from themselves. Isn't it revealing that the ones who talk about you the most are often the ones who feel most threatened? Yet you've done nothing but show up. You carry within you the same spirit that was in Joseph. His own brothers couldn't stand his presence, not because he had done wrong, but because his favor reminded them of their own lack of vision and purpose. They threw him into a pit, not because of his dreams, but because of what his dreams exposed in them. Genesis 37:11 tells us, "His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind." Jealousy doesn't need a reason. Sometimes favor is all it takes to provoke it. And much like Joseph, your journey has placed you in environments where others are stirred by your essence. You don't need to reveal their secrets. Your presence simply confirms that secrets are there. This is why they gossip, why your name stays in conversations you never consented to, why your silence speaks louder than their words. When people are not prepared to heal, they don't seek understanding, they seek defense. And when the truth threatens their mask, they reach for the safest weapon they know: gossip. Have you ever wondered why some people choose to misunderstand you, even when you've done nothing but radiate peace? You might wonder, why me? Why does my life feel like a battleground for other people's insecurities? But here's the mystery: you were never sent to fight. You were sent to illuminate. That's why your spirit feels confrontational without being combative. It's not your voice that causes discomfort, it's your truth, a truth that carries echoes of Christ himself, who could walk into a synagogue and cause an uproar simply by reading from Isaiah. The words weren't new, but the authority he carried was undeniable, and that's what you carry too. In Luke 4:32 it is written, "They were amazed at his teaching because his words had authority." You walk in that same unspoken authority, and even the spiritually blind can feel it. And what if the constant attention, the whispers behind your back, and the subtle exclusion were never meant to harm you but to confirm you? What if this pressure is simply proof that your presence is prophetic? That you were never designed to fit in, but to reveal what's hidden? Could it be that their rejection is not a curse, but a clue, a divine confirmation that you were sent, not to blend in, but to stand apart? You see, you're not the one making enemies, you're revealing them. You're not stirring up drama, you're awakening truth. And those who are committed to deception will always feel uneasy around those who live in divine alignment. This is why you're the hot topic, not because you're seeking to be seen, but because you were chosen to be revealed. Another reason your name keeps surfacing in conversations is because you are the living, breathing contradiction to every excuse they've ever told themselves. You are walking proof that comfort zones are illusions, and that breakthrough doesn't require permission. Many people may never admit this out loud, but deep down they cling to the belief that success is only accessible under specific conditions, like wealth, perfect timing, elite connections, or a pristine upbringing. Why? Because that belief system provides them with shelter. It protects their pride, giving them a convenient explanation for why they haven't moved, why they haven't changed, and why they've stayed the same. But then you showed up, not with privilege, not with a silver spoon, not with applause or sponsorship. You came forward with bruises and scars, still you moved with faith. You made progress where others only made plans. And your presence alone forces people to confront something uncomfortable. The idea that they are not stuck because they lack opportunity, but because they've made peace with stagnation. Could it be that your rise is not just inspirational, but also deeply unsettling to those still waiting for ideal conditions? You didn't wait for the perfect moment to start. You stepped out when everything around you screamed, "Not yet." You didn't need everyone's approval to proceed. You trusted the quiet whisper of God inside you when no one else clapped. Like the woman with the issue of blood in Mark 5:25-34, you pressed forward through pain, past the crowd, and touched destiny without an invitation. That kind of resilience rewrites the rules. It confronts every excuse others have used to delay their own transformation. You built something from what looked like nothing. You prayed through seasons that would have broken the average soul. You healed without applause. You kept going without a stage. You didn't ask for comfort. You chose calling. And when others see that kind of tenacity, something inside them either ignites with admiration or recoils in defensiveness. That's when the narrative flips. Some begin whispering, "She must have faked it. He must have cheated. They must have had help." Because if they admit that what you carry is real, then they also have to face the truth. They've been sitting on potential, not purpose. What happens when your very existence becomes the challenge they've been avoiding? This is why they analyze every move you make, not just to admire you, but to dissect you. They want to find the flaw. They want to locate the crack in your story, the moment they can say, "Aha, that's where it all comes from." They are not watching just to see what you'll do next. They're watching because if your transformation is authentic, then their excuses crumble. Pope John Paul II once said, "The future starts today, not tomorrow." Yet, how many around you are still waiting for tomorrow to begin anything? You didn't wait. You didn't beg. You broke the mold. And in doing so, you exposed the lie that progress requires perfection. You proved that movement in God's will trumps strategy without Him. As Ecclesiastes 11:4 reminds us, "Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap." You didn't wait for the wind, you planted in the storm. They don't just see you as a person. You're a disruption to everything they thought was true. You're a rebuke without saying a word. Your elevation isn't just admired, it's interrogated. And yet, despite their doubts and suspicion, your fruit speaks louder than their fear. Is it any wonder they can't stop watching? Not because they don't believe, but because deep down they do. You're not walking according to their formula. You're walking according to divine alignment. And that is why they wrestle. You shattered the myth that people need the world's approval to walk in purpose. You've proven that the real formula was faith all along. You are not their enemy, but your story is a mirror, and sometimes mirrors feel like judgment when people aren't ready to reflect. So they talk, they twist, they diminish. But even as they do, one truth remains unshaken. You didn't wait for access, you became it. There's something about you that people can't quite explain, but they can't seem to look away either. Whether they admit it or not, they're studying you. Not in admiration alone, but in fascination. Because to them, you've become a living instruction manual for a reality they can't enter. You are operating from a code they were never taught. You are navigating life by a script that wasn't handed out in their schools, families, or friend circles. And that disrupts their understanding of what is possible. You don't follow the patterns they were taught to trust. You don't react the way they expect. When others would lash out, you respond with wisdom. When most would chase validation, you retreat into peace. When storms come, you stand still, unmoved. That kind of poise can't be explained by formal education or social status. It's not learned in boardrooms or acquired through inheritance. It's something else entirely, something divine. What if the reason they keep watching is because your life contradicts everything they thought they needed to survive? There's a sacred rhythm to the way you move, a deep ancient wisdom that flows through your decisions, your healing, your silence. You don't just survive, your healing transforms atmospheres. And even when you think no one is paying attention, someone is observing your journey, taking mental notes. They see the way you carry yourself after a fall. They notice how you bounce back stronger without needing to broadcast your wounds. They watch your glow up, not as a trend, but as a testimony. And though their lips may never utter the words, their spirit recognizes the lesson. You are proof that power doesn't come from applause. It comes from alignment. In 1 Corinthians 2:14, Paul writes, "The person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness and cannot understand them, because they are discerned only through the Spirit." That is exactly why many people struggle to interpret you. You live by revelation, not routine. You're not decoding life through logic alone, but through intimacy with God. And that makes you incomprehensible to those who only trust what they can count, measure, or predict. Even in silence, you speak volumes. You don't need to declare your journey, because your fruit reveals it. You don't need to defend your process, because your peace already proves its value. When they see that, something inside them shifts. Yet instead of coming closer to ask what fuels you, they often settle for gossip. Why? Because silence demands humility, and many would rather speculate than submit to a truth that challenges their comfort zone. There's a reason they keep circling back to you. They're not just curious, they're searching. They see in you a type of strength that doesn't dominate, but liberates. A kind of confidence that is rooted, not loud. And a form of healing that embraces the messy, the sacred, and the in-between. You've shown them that healing isn't about looking strong, it's about becoming whole. That power doesn't always roar, sometimes it weeps. Could it be that you're awakening them to a depth they never knew they needed? Brené Brown, a research professor and best-selling author known for her work on vulnerability, once said, "You either walk inside your story and own it, or you stand outside your story and hustle for your worthiness." You, chosen one, have walked inside your story. You didn't wait for it to be perfect. You embraced the chaos, the lessons, the breaking, and from that, your authenticity was born. That is what makes you impossible to ignore. They can't decode how you move, so they try to label you. They can't trace the source of your joy, so they question your motives. But beneath the surface, they're not offended by your presence. They're haunted by their own longing. They see the clarity in your eyes, the conviction in your voice, the connection you carry with something greater, and they crave it. But here's the part they don't always understand. What you have can't be imitated. It can only be cultivated. It wasn't given to you through imitation. It was formed in the wilderness, in lonely places where no spotlight reached. This is what sets you apart. You're not just living, you're teaching without trying. You're awakening people without preaching. You're holding up a mirror to the soul and inviting them into an inner world they didn't know they were missing. And they don't even realize it's happening, yet they can't seem to look away. That's why you're the topic. Not because you're seeking attention, but because your life is aligned with something sacred, something eternal. You're not just following trends, you're following spirit. And that, no matter how much they try, can never be copied. Your presence alone disrupts systems that were never built on truth, only on control. You carry a kind of energy that makes people uncomfortable, not because you're offensive, but because you're authentic. And in a world where manipulation wears the mask of unity, authenticity becomes dangerous. The moment you walk into a room, you challenge the invisible contracts everyone else silently agreed to. Whether it's in the workplace, in families, in churches, or online. So many environments operate under quiet agreements. Pretend, compete, flatter, and don't challenge the nonsense. But you, God's chosen one, you never signed that contract. You don't need to dominate. You don't strive to be seen. And somehow, that threatens those who only feel powerful when others are beneath them. You don't chase claps. You don't fake kindness. You're not addicted to being liked. And that alone short-circuit systems that depend on emotional submission. Could it be that your quiet refusal to conform is louder than the most aggressive opposition? Jesus himself did the same. In Luke 20, the religious leaders asked him trick questions, hoping to trap him into saying something they could twist. But his answers revealed their manipulation and exposed their hearts. He didn't scream. He didn't rebel violently. His truth, calmly delivered, dismantled their illusions. In much the same way, you don't expose anything directly. Your spirit does the work without needing an audience. People can feel that you see through things, even when you stay silent. You don't laugh at fake jokes. You don't nod to dysfunction just to keep the peace. You don't participate in power rituals meant to flatter egos or feed false authority. And when you don't play along, they panic. Why? Because your refusal to engage reveals how fragile the game really is. In Matthew 23, Jesus warned about those who love the seats of honor, the titles, the applause, but neglect justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Aren't many modern systems still built on that same hollow foundation? You're not interested in playing the politics of approval. You stand in your truth, and that threatens people whose influence is built on illusion. That's when the whispers start. They're too much. They're not a team player. They think they're better. But it's not criticism, it's projection. What they're really saying is, this one sees through us. This one refuses to bend. And when control is your only tool, someone who can't be manipulated feels like a threat. Even in the church this can happen. Religious systems, when infected by ego, become more about hierarchy than holiness. And when you walk in carrying genuine spiritual fire, you unsettle the routine. You're not interested in positions. You're aligned with purpose. You're not seeking favor with man. You're walking in favor with God. And that shifts the entire room. Isn't it revealing how quickly truth becomes disrespectful in spaces built on power rather than presence? Nelson Mandela, the freedom fighter and global leader, once said, "I'm not a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying. You're not trying to be perfect. You're simply unwilling to pretend." And that shakes systems that depend on masks. When you stay grounded in your calling, when you refuse to clap for chaos or submit to ego games, you reveal a path that bypasses the entire structure. That's why they twist your story. That's why they warn others about you, as if your clarity is contagious. They'll say you're rebellious when you're really righteous. They'll say you're arrogant when you're simply aligned. And they'll try to isolate you, not because you're a threat to others, but because you're a threat to the illusion that's been keeping them in control. But here's the truth they don't want to admit. Your very life proves that the whole system can be bypassed. You didn't climb through manipulation, you rose through obedience. You didn't flatter your way into position, you were positioned by God. And that breaks every false formula they've trusted. You're not here to play the game. You were never created for that. You were sent to expose the lie that the game was ever worth playing. That's why they talk. That's why they twist the story. Because if others start following your lead, walking in spirit, not performance, their entire system unravels. That's what really scares them. Not your presence, but what your presence awakens in others. Another reason you're the constant subject of discussion is because people feel powerless in your presence. They talk, not because you've harmed them, but because they can't influence you. You are immune to the tactics that once worked so easily on others. Emotional manipulation, flattery, guilt, intimidation, or silence. And for those whose sense of control is wrapped in their ability to sway others, this is unbearable. When someone realizes they can't control you, what do they reach for next? The only thing left, your reputation. You can't be guilt-tripped into staying in spaces that drain your spirit. You can't be lured back by false affection or shallow praise. You don't lower your voice to fit into rooms you've outgrown. And you certainly don't shrink just to make others feel comfortable. Why does your refusal to conform irritate those who claim to want the best for you? Because control was the goal all along. Not relationship, not love, not truth. Control. This is what happened with Jesus and the religious elite. They couldn't trap him with questions, flatter him into compromise, or shame him into silence. So they conspired. They whispered. They plotted. In Matthew 12:14, we read, "But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him, how to destroy him. They feared what they couldn't control." Just like them, your critics aren't attacking out of strength. They're reacting from a place of fear. You don't respond the way they expect. You don't run after them for validation or ask, "What did I do wrong?" You've developed a kind of spiritual composure that makes their usual tactics ineffective. And when people realize they've lost emotional leverage over you, they start looking for new ways to feel powerful. That's when gossip enters the room. Because gossip, though cheap, is a form of control. It allows them to shape perception when they can't shape reality. Have you noticed how quickly confidence gets rebranded as arrogance when someone else feels threatened by it? Or how the moment you set a boundary, you're suddenly labeled bitter? Or when you choose solitude over codependence, they say you've become cold. These narratives aren't built on truth. They're built on lost control. You've outgrown the cage they designed for you, and now they don't know how to categorize you without those old levers. There's a powerful line from Maya Angelou, the legendary poet and civil rights icon. When people show you who they are, believe them. But what she didn't need to say, because people often live it, is that when you show people who you are, and they can't handle it, they try to make others stop believing you. That's where the whisper campaigns begin. Not because you're the villain, but because you escaped their narrative. This exact dynamic was also seen in the life of Nehemiah. When Sanballat and Tobiah realized they couldn't intimidate him or halt his divine assignment to rebuild the wall, they resorted to false rumors. Nehemiah 6:8 captures his bold response. Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. And like Nehemiah, you too are unmoved. because chosen ones don't abandon their mission just because others are uncomfortable with their strength. Gossip becomes their final weapon when everything else fails. But the truth is, talking isn't proof of power, it's proof of defeat. If you had truly lost, why would they still need to explain your story to others? If they had really moved on, why would your name still live rent-free in their conversations? What they're really doing is projecting. They try to control how others see you, hoping that it will isolate you or at least make you second-guess your calling. But the only thing they reveal is how fragile they've become behind the image they've carefully constructed. Proverbs 26:24-26 warns us, "Enemies disguise themselves with their lips, but in their hearts they harbor deceit. Their malice may be concealed by deception, but their wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. Their gossip may sound polished, but it's rotting from the inside." You are the evidence that real power cannot be bought, silenced, flattered, or coerced. That's what unsettles them most. You don't resist their manipulation, you're unreachable by it. And when someone realizes that their manipulation no longer affects you, their words become desperate, bitter, last attempts to rewrite a story they've already lost control of. Isn't it interesting that the ones who claim to be the most unbothered by you still find ways to bring you up behind closed doors? You are not the one who failed them. They failed to contain you, and now they talk, not because they care, but because they lost. There's a reason your calm spirit has become such a trigger for others, one that goes beyond words. It's not what you say, it's what you don't say. Your stillness, your quiet strength, your refusal to over-explain your presence or beg for belonging, all of it unsettles the ones who have never known peace without pretending. And to them, your confidence doesn't look like maturity. It looks like arrogance. Why? Because they can't comprehend peace that isn't purchased through applause. You no longer play by the rules of performance. You no longer bend in order to be seen or shrink to be accepted. And that, chosen one, is exactly why they whisper. In a world obsessed with validation and addicted to noise, your stillness makes people nervous. Could it be that your silence speaks a language they've forgotten how to understand? They can't figure out why you're no longer chasing the crowd, why you walk away instead of arguing, why you don't flinch at rejection. What they miss is this: you're not cold, you're just centered. You're not arrogant, you're just free. When Jesus stood before Pilate in John 19, accused, insulted, and misunderstood, he didn't argue back, he didn't plead, he didn't prove. Pilate was stunned by his silence. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate asked. But Christ wasn't moved. He knew who he was. In that moment, the Savior of the world showed us something powerful. Sometimes, silence is the loudest form of truth. How often have you been misjudged, not because of your actions, but because of your refusal to react? To people who are still chained to the need for constant affirmation, your peace seems like pride. Your boundaries are misread as walls. Your calm is mistaken for superiority. They say, "You think you're better than us," not realizing that you've simply chosen to stop performing. And when someone has built their identity on approval, authenticity feels like betrayal. But what they don't realize is that you've been there too. You once danced for applause. You once apologized for being too much or not enough. You once tried to hold yourself together with borrowed smiles and shallow praise. But you've walked through the fire. You've cried through silent nights. You've peeled off the mask, faced your pain, and healed from the inside out. You stopped performing not because you're above anyone, but because you finally understood the weight of pretending. And now that you've tasted true peace, the kind that doesn't depend on applause, you're not willing to trade it for shallow approval ever again. Brené Brown, the renowned research professor and author, once said, "True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are." And you, chosen one, are finally living that truth. But to those still performing for the crowd, your authenticity feels like a threat. This is exactly what David understood in the Psalms. In Psalm 131, verse 2, he wrote, "But I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me." That kind of calm isn't born from pride. It's born from process, from surrender, from trusting God more than people. But not everyone is ready for that journey. Those still addicted to external validation will always misread your peace. They think you're detached because you don't engage in drama. They think you're cold because you don't react to emotional bait. They think you're distant because you refuse to be dragged into chaos that doesn't belong to you. But the truth is, they're not reading you, they're reading themselves. What if your calm is just a mirror, and they're afraid of what it reflects back at them? Freedom has a fragrance, and you carry it. But freedom is offensive to those still imprisoned by false selves. That's why they talk. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you've stopped doing what they still feel obligated to do. You've stepped into a peace they secretly crave, but aren't yet ready to pursue. You've chosen silence over performance, stillness over chaos, truth over applause. And so your presence becomes a quiet revolution, because real peace, unbothered, grounded, spirit-led peace, looks like arrogance to those who are still auditioning for love. And while they talk behind your back, what they're really saying is, "I wish I had the courage to be that free." There's something about you that unsettles people, but not because of your mistakes. It's because you're walking in a favor they can't explain, much less replicate. You are living proof that divine favor is not earned. It is recognized. In their world, blessing must be justified by labor. Grace must be bought with suffering. Position must follow performance. But here you are, standing in full light, fully chosen, without playing their game. And that shakes their entire belief system. You didn't climb your way into alignment by flattering the gatekeepers. You didn't earn your influence by broadcasting your pain or networking your way into rooms built on pretense. You didn't follow the script they expected you to memorize. Still, the oil flows. The doors open. The presence follows you. How do you explain favor that breaks every rule they've built their identity upon? This is what enraged Joseph's brothers in Genesis 37. He didn't earn the coat of many colors by outworking them. He didn't manipulate his way into their father's heart. He was simply favored. And because they couldn't understand how favor could rest on someone who hadn't performed for it, they plotted to destroy him. They hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said, the scripture says. That's what happens when you're chosen, not by merit, but by mantle. Your life isn't a result of checked boxes or flawless resumes. It's alignment with purpose. You didn't strive for the light you now carry. You simply stopped hiding from it. And that's why they talk. That's why they whisper. That's why your name comes up in rooms you've never entered, because you've become living evidence that divine favor doesn't bow to performance. It responds to purpose. You didn't bow for applause. You didn't break yourself for approval. You didn't fake meekness or manufacture false humility. The grace on your life is not the fruit of performance. It is the confirmation of calling. How can someone whose entire identity is rooted in striving ever understand a person who walks in ease because they walk with God? This is what the Pharisees couldn't comprehend about Jesus. He wasn't trained in their systems, didn't sit under their rabbis, didn't fit into their hierarchy, and yet he spoke with authority, healed with power, and drew multitudes without a title. John 7:15 says, "The Jews were amazed and asked, 'How did this man get such learning without having been taught?'" They couldn't grasp that favor flows from divine identity, not institutional validation. Real-life examples echo this truth. Consider Tyler Perry. an actor, filmmaker, and entrepreneur who built an empire not by conforming to Hollywood's system, but by creating his own. He said once, "What God has for you, it is for you. It doesn't matter who rises against it." That's the language of favor. You carry the same. You didn't wait for a stage to be handed to you. You are the stage. You didn't seek validation. You became the evidence. And now that people see your light, they panic. They twist your strength into pride. They paint your confidence as arrogance. They call your discernment manipulation, not because it's true, but because they fear that others might see through the performance and start recognizing the real in you. What happens to the applause when people stop clapping for masks and start honoring the mantle? That's the threat you represent. Not a threat of rebellion, but a threat to deception. They worked their whole lives to build what flows to you naturally. They made sacrifices, played politics, performed rituals, curated images, all to access a fraction of what you carry when you're simply being yourself. And now, rather than examine their own hearts, they try to discredit you. They smear your name. They stir doubt. Because as long as the crowd believes you're fake, they don't have to face how empty their performance feels. But what they don't understand is this: you never needed their stage to be chosen. You were marked by God before anyone ever took notice. Jeremiah 1:5 declares, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." That mark wasn't voted on. It wasn't influenced by social status or human praise. It was divine selection. That's why you're the target. Not because you violated the rules, but because you proved the rules don't apply to divine calling. You're the reminder that God's favor is sovereign. It doesn't consult systems. It doesn't wait for permission. It chooses. And it chose you. There's something undeniable about the effect you have on people, even the ones who swear they can't stand you. They might say they dislike you, scoff at your name, or pretend to be indifferent. But their reactions betray them. You can feel it. Their words say one thing, but their energy sings another tune, one they can't stop replaying. Your presence activates something in their spirit. It's like a lightning strike to their carefully constructed calm. You stir something raw and real in them, and that kind of disruption becomes addictive, especially for those who've spent their lives on autopilot. Have you ever wondered why people who avoid you still seem to orbit your energy? You're not just another personality. You operate on a frequency that jolts people out of spiritual numbness. And that frequency, unapologetically honest, deeply rooted, unmistakably divine, feels like both a confrontation and a call. A confrontation with everything they've buried, and a call toward everything they secretly long to become. They claim irritation, but what they're really wrestling with is recognition. A recognition that your spirit carries something theirs isn't ready to hold. And still, they can't look away. This was the same unsettling effect Jesus had on the crowds and religious leaders. They were simultaneously drawn to him and disturbed by him. In Mark 1:22 it says, "The people were amazed at his teaching, because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law." He wasn't just speaking, he was resonating. And like you, he wasn't trying to win approval. He was walking in truth. Could it be that you too are resonating with a kind of heavenly authority they can't explain? Some people are so used to shallow, surface-level relationships that when someone like you enters the picture, vibrating with authenticity, depth and clarity, they short-circuit. They've learned to thrive in environments of pretense and comfort, but your energy exposes the fault lines beneath their routines. It pokes at the emptiness they've numbed. It makes them feel both alive and uneasy, seen and vulnerable. That's why they lash out. That's why they gossip. That's why your name rolls off their tongue in rooms where you're not present. It's not hatred, it's spiritual addiction, a craving for the transformation you represent. They can't stop talking about you because you've become the symbol of everything they're scared to pursue. Your frequency is freedom, and freedom is threatening when you're still in chains. Think about Paul on the road to Damascus. Before he became the Apostle Paul, he was Saul, a persecutor of Christians, a man deeply triggered by the early followers of Christ. He wasn't just opposing them, he was obsessed, until Jesus himself met him in blinding light and said, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Acts 9:4. It wasn't hate, it was spiritual conflict. Saul couldn't escape the pull, even in his resistance. That's what your critics are experiencing now. You're the interruption they didn't ask for, but can't stop responding to. Even in the modern world, people like Brené Brown, a best-selling author and vulnerability researcher, have touched on this phenomenon. She said, "People will do almost anything to not feel pain, including cause pain." And that's exactly what's happening. Your energy makes them feel. It awakens dormant emotions and truth they haven't dared to face. And so, instead of turning inward to process it, they project outward onto you. But their fixation is telling. They may call you names, but they can't forget you. They might reject your influence, but they study your every move. They criticize what they can't control, analyze what they can't understand, and obsess over what they can't replicate. Isn't it revealing how the ones who say you don't matter are the ones who bring you up the most? You've become more than just a person to them. You've become a mirror, a living, breathing reflection of the courage, peace, and wholeness they crave but aren't ready to chase. Your very existence disrupts their narrative, and until they confront that truth within themselves, they'll keep circling back to you over and over again. You're not just in their conversations because you're controversial. You're there because you're catalytic. You've become a spiritual irritant to stagnation, a reminder that there's more to life than checking boxes and staying comfortable. And every time your name enters the room, it carries the echo of what they could become if they'd just surrender their masks. That's why they can't quit you. Not because you're flawless, but because you're real. Not because you're loud, but because you're clear. You're the sound of something higher, and they're still trying to figure out why their soul won't stop listening. They keep saying your name, not because you're the villain, the hero, or even the focus. They say your name because it gives them something to cling to when their own life feels hollow. You, chosen one, have become their coping mechanism, their emotional escape. Every time they bring you up in conversation, they're not talking about you, they're talking around their pain. It's easier to scrutinize your journey than to examine the silence screaming inside their own soul. Your name has become their distraction. Every detail of your past, every pivot in your path, every visible victory or stumble becomes a talking point, not because they truly care, but because dissecting you keeps them from facing the mirror. You are, unknowingly, the TV rerun they keep replaying to avoid sitting in the discomfort of their reality. Isn't it strange how the people most obsessed with your imperfections are often the ones most afraid to look at their own reflection? This is what happened with the religious leaders during Jesus' time. They followed him around, criticized his every move, questioned his intentions, and dissected his words. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. And truth is disruptive when you're trying to avoid your own. John 3:20 says, "Everyone who does evil hates the light, and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed." You've become that light, unwelcome, yet impossible to ignore. And like moths to flame they gather, not to be warmed, but to criticize the heat. When they gossip about your choices or whisper about your past, they're really trying to construct a narrative that justifies their own stagnation. If they can paint you as flawed, they don't have to face the fact that they've stopped growing. If they can frame your confidence as conceit or your elevation as ego, they can stay comfortable in the shadows of their unhealed pain. What would they talk about if they weren't talking about you? And could they survive the silence that question would bring? Psychologists have long recognized this behavior. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people don't want understanding. They want distraction. And so, instead of confronting regret, loneliness, fear, or failure, they use you as the storyline. Not because you invited them in, but because your life, your light, your presence gives them something to orbit when they've lost their own sense of direction. You didn't ask to be their crutch, but that's what you've become. Not out of malice, but because people will do anything to avoid facing the darker parts of themselves. You've become their mental noise machine, a way to avoid the deafening quiet that healing requires. They study your moves, your relationships, your growth, not to celebrate it, but to distract from their own stalled progress. This is exactly what David experienced. In Psalm 109, verse 3, he laments, "With words of hatred they surround me, they attack me without cause." Why? Because the moment you rise, your very existence challenges people to confront the question, why haven't I moved forward? And for those unwilling to answer that honestly, it's much easier to put the spotlight back on you. Even in our time, people like Princess Diana, who radiated authenticity and compassion, became constant subjects of media scrutiny, not because she was scandalous, but because she stirred something deeper in the public psyche. She made people feel. And when someone makes the world feel, the world either heals or lashes out. That's what's happening with you. Your presence is awakening something dormant in others. And that awakening doesn't always begin with applause. It often begins with resistance, discomfort, even hostility. But beneath all of that is the same truth. Your life is a reminder that the soul can't thrive in avoidance forever. Could it be that their obsession with your story is actually a cry for help? A signal that their spirit is starving for something real, something holy, something healed? Your name lives in their conversations because it's easier than letting healing live in their hearts. But the more they talk about you, the more they reveal what they've refused to face. You are not the problem. You are the mirror. You reflect what they could become if they chose to surrender the mask and begin the work. And until they turn that spotlight inward, until they choose the narrow path of growth over the wide road of gossip, your name will continue to echo, not because you're seeking attention, but because you represent everything their soul longs for and their ego can't admit. There's a reason your story makes people uncomfortable. You, chosen one, are the unwritten chapter they never had the courage to write. You are the bold decision they talked themselves out of, the risk they never took, the healing they never pursued. Every step you take in truth reminds them of the dreams they abandoned for comfort. You didn't just survive. You chose to live fully and freely, and that choice exposes the places in their soul where they settled. You became the chapter they once envisioned, but never dared to begin. They watch you speak your truth, shed the old layers, rise from the ashes, and move in purpose, and it stirs something in them. Not hatred, not even jealousy, something deeper, regret. And when regret becomes too heavy to hold, people look for somewhere else to place it. So they place it on you. They twist your words, question your motives, distort your journey. Not because you're flawed, but because you remind them of the freedom they forfeited. Could it be that their resentment is really longing in disguise? A longing to be as free, as fearless, as fully themselves as you've become. They whisper, not because you failed, but because you didn't wait for permission. You authored your story with scars still visible, tears still drying, and courage still trembling in your chest. You were never perfect. You were just willing. That's what sets you apart, and that's what makes your light unbearable to those still hiding in the shadows of old scripts. This is the same reaction Moses provoked. He stepped out of the palace and into purpose, leaving behind safety for destiny. The Israelites doubted him at first, not because he lacked calling, but because his courage unsettled them. In Exodus 2:14, one of them even asked, "Who made you ruler and judge over us?" Sometimes people would rather question your authority than confront the possibility that their own life could look different if they had your faith. Even in modern times, Malala Yousafzai, Pakistani activist and Nobel Peace Prize winner, broke the silence surrounding oppression in her country. She risked everything to speak out, and she said, "When the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful." That voice is yours. You broke the contract of silence that generations signed in fear. You said what others were too scared to admit. You did what others only imagined. Most people live under an invisible agreement. Don't speak too loudly. Don't question tradition. Don't shine too brightly. It's a social pact dressed up as peace. But it's not peace, it's survival. They inherit it from those before them, repeating the same cycles, carrying the same wounds, clinging to outdated rules that keep everything small and predictable. Then you showed up, and everything began to shift. You refused to keep quiet about pain that had been normalized. You challenged beliefs that had never been questioned. You called out patterns that were passed off as just the way things are. You healed instead of hiding. You chose growth over approval. And because of that, you became a threat, not to truth, but to the fragile system built on silence. Why do they call you rebellious when all you did was tell the truth out loud? You didn't ask to be a disruptor. You were simply obedient. You couldn't unsee what God revealed, and once you saw it, you couldn't go back. Jeremiah 29 says, "His word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I am weary of holding it in. Indeed, I cannot." That fire burns in you now, and that fire makes people nervous. Your courage is not compliance, it's confrontation, without even trying. You didn't raise your voice, your obedience did. You didn't break rules to hurt people. You broke cycles to heal yourself and generations after you. You walked away from roles written by fear, and you authored a new script. One that says peace doesn't require pretending, that joy doesn't require silence, that growth demands risk. And for those who've built their identity on never rocking the boat, your movement feels like a storm. They don't call you dangerous because of what you do. They call you dangerous because of what you represent. A life that cannot be tamed by approval. You are living proof that real transformation begins the moment someone says, "Enough." Enough of the silence, enough of the cycles, enough of the fear. And that's what they can't stand. You remind them that they could have made the same choice, but didn't. But here's the truth. No matter how many times they try to rewrite your story with whispers and resistance, they can't change the fact that you broke free. You are no longer part of the contract. You are walking proof that God calls, qualifies, and crowns those who refuse to stay quiet any longer. You're not a threat because you're loud. You're a threat because you're real. And no amount of editing from the sidelines can dull the legacy you're building with every bold step. Your light doesn't ask for permission to shine, and that alone is enough to offend the world around you. You don't wait for approval. You don't hesitate at the edge of your purpose, looking for applause before stepping forward. You move, chosen one, with clarity and confidence because you've come to understand something most never will. Your calling was ordained by God, not approved by people. Is it really arrogance they're seeing in you, or is it their own hesitation being confronted by your boldness? You carry your gifts without apology. You speak without over-explaining. You lead without begging to be followed. And that kind of quiet, sacred confidence unnerves people who've been taught that humility means hiding your greatness. To them, your boldness feels rebellious. Your presence feels disruptive. But it's not because you're too much. It's because they've spent so long being not enough, and your light brings that imbalance into focus. You were never called to play small. Jesus himself declared in Matthew 5:14-16, "You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Let that sink in. Your brilliance isn't just a blessing, it's an act of worship. Every time you operate in your gift with courage and truth, you're glorifying the one who placed that light within you. But there are people, many in fact, who were raised on a version of humility that wasn't rooted in truth but in fear. They were taught that to be humble is to step aside, to hide their talents, to keep their head down so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. They confused self-erasure with virtue, so when you show up whole, healed, and honest, it feels like a personal challenge to their belief system. Your confidence becomes a mirror they didn't ask to look into. It reflects back all the places where they've kept silent, played safe, or chosen invisibility over impact. And instead of being inspired, they become offended. They don't realize that your boldness doesn't come from pride, it comes from purpose. Why does your light offend them so deeply if they were never meant to compete with it? Could it be that your shine exposes their own decision to hide? This tension is not new. It's what David faced when he stepped forward to face Goliath. His brothers didn't celebrate his courage, they questioned his motives. In 1 Samuel 17:28, his older brother Eliab said to him, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart." But David wasn't proud. He was positioned, he wasn't arrogant. He was assigned, just like you. And in modern times, figures like Serena Williams, arguably one of the greatest athletes of all time, have been repeatedly labeled arrogant, loud, or too confident. But when asked about it, she said, "The word confident can be a dirty word, but I am confident, and I'm okay with that." Confidence threatens those still negotiating with their own worth. And just like Serena, you don't need to apologize for being exactly who God made you to be. People cling to pretend humility like a shield. It's safer to stay small, safer to criticize those who stand tall, safer to mask fear with false modesty than to risk stepping fully into purpose. That's why your boldness draws whispers. That's why your presence shifts rooms. Not because you're doing too much, but because you're doing what they're afraid to even try. They call it ego. They call it pride. But those are projections. Your presence doesn't lie. It illuminates. Your light calls for truth in a world that survives on illusion. And in a room full of masks, the one who shows up unfiltered will always be misunderstood. How many times have you been labeled difficult when all you were doing was refusing to shrink? Your light is not arrogance, it's assignment, and it was never meant to be dimmed for anyone's comfort. Just as a lighthouse doesn't ask the sea for permission to shine, neither should you ask broken systems or wounded hearts for validation before walking in your anointing. You are a beacon, a reminder that real humility isn't hiding, it's honoring the gift and honoring the giver. You shine not to steal attention, but to reflect the one who called you, and no matter how loud their discomfort becomes, they cannot dim what heaven has already ignited. They don't understand how you're still standing, and because they can't make sense of it, they convince themselves it must be a lie. You've walked through fire, rumors, betrayals, rejection, sabotage. They've hurled everything they could at you. Twisted words, deliberate silence, spiritual warfare masked as concern. Your name has been dragged through conversations you didn't deserve, and your reputation tossed into storms you never asked for. And yet, you remain, not just standing, but rising. Not just surviving, but thriving. How can they accept your resilience when everything they did was designed to break you? Your very existence in this moment shatters the narrative they created. If you're still walking with strength, still speaking with clarity, still loving with wholeness, then their cruelty didn't work. And that reality is too painful for them to accept. So they rewrite the story. They say you're faking. They say your strength is performative. They say your light is manipulation, or your peace is pretense. Not because it's true, but because if it is true, then they were wrong. And that kind of conviction is unbearable to someone who's still living in denial. This happened to Job. After losing everything, his wealth, his children, even his health, he still held fast to his integrity. And when his friends couldn't reconcile his suffering with their limited view of righteousness, they accused him. They said in Job 4:7, "Consider now, who, being innocent, has ever perished?" They assumed guilt because they couldn't process grace. The same is true for you. They assume your success must be corrupted because they don't understand what it means to be kept by God. Your survival doesn't make sense to people who don't know how divine protection works. They don't know what it's like to be held by unseen hands when everything external is falling apart. They've never known what it means when Isaiah 54:17 says, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." They see the weapons launched, but they can't comprehend why you're still whole. And that offends them. You are the proof they never wanted to see, the evidence that good can win, that integrity can last, that faith can endure, but that breaks their worldview, because they've built their lives around the assumption that power belongs to the manipulative, that strength belongs to the aggressive, and that survival belongs to those who compromise. You're the interruption to that logic. What happens when a person refuses to become bitter and still wins anyway? Even in today's world, public figures like Nelson Mandela challenge this same notion. After 27 years of imprisonment, he came out not with revenge, but with grace. People questioned his motives. They couldn't believe a man could suffer so deeply and still walk in forgiveness. But that's what divine favor looks like. It rewrites the impossible, just like you. You didn't survive by accident. You weren't lucky. You were covered, anointed, chosen. What they thought would destroy you became the very soil God used to plant your next level. And that unnerves those who believe they had the power to write your ending. Have they ever stopped to wonder why every time they counted you out, heaven counted you back in? Your endurance shakes their sense of control, because it means their rejection didn't define you, their gossip didn't confine you, their absence didn't diminish you. What they tried to bury only grew roots. And now that you've broken through the dirt and started to bloom, they can't look away. So instead, they try to explain it away. They cling to the idea that you're pretending, that your smile is too steady, your strength too suspicious, your comeback too smooth. But beneath that doubt is fear, the fear that God is real, that grace is real, that favor is real, and that it has nothing to do with manipulation, applause, or politics, that what they tried to sabotage has only multiplied. They say it's fake because acknowledging the truth would force them to face their own cruelty, their own failures, their own unwillingness to grow. If they admit that divine justice exists, they'd have to wrestle with the question, what role did I play in trying to stop what God ordained? You, chosen one, are living proof that truth doesn't die under pressure, that faith can outlast fire, that resilience isn't a personality trait, it's a spiritual weapon, and that is what terrifies them most. Because your strength wasn't inherited from the world, it was infused by heaven. You are the first undeniable proof in their lives that God is not a religion. He is a relationship, not just a set of rules, not a doctrine in robes, not a ritual to be recited. You are living evidence that God is deeply personal, unpredictable, intimate, and infinitely more real than the constructs they've been taught to cling to. What happens when someone walks in divine favor without checking any of the religious boxes? That's the question your life forces them to confront. You didn't take the path they expected. You didn't wear the labels they trust. You don't speak in rehearsed phrases or perform for pulpits. And yet, your anointing is unmistakable. Your life carries a weight they can't measure, a grace they can't explain, and a light they can't extinguish. You don't recite the right prayers. You live the kind of faith that rewrites atmospheres, and that alone threatens the very framework of what they thought connection with God looked like. This is what Jesus embodied everywhere he went. He healed on the Sabbath, ate with tax collectors, touched lepers. In Mark 2:17, he said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." He broke the rules to fulfill the higher law: love, mercy, truth. And you, chosen one, are following that same rhythm, divinely disruptive, authentically set apart. Your relationship with God is raw. It's unfiltered. It didn't come through stained glass windows or borrowed theology. It was carved through storms, silence, and sacred wrestlings behind closed doors. That's why it confuses them. You don't fit in their theological mold. Your faith doesn't wear robes or require stage lights. It's alive. And because they can't predict or control how God shows up in your life, they label you as dangerous, rebellious, or off track. But you're not off track. You're off grid. You live outside the lines of man-made religion, and that's terrifying to those who've spent their entire lives worshipping the structure more than the spirit. Could it be that they're not reacting to your flaws, but to the fact that your freedom exposes their limitations? They were taught that closeness to God comes through institutions, titles, a perfectly curated image. But then you appeared, unbothered, unsanctioned, and undeniably chosen, and you carry more spiritual weight in your stillness than others do in their performances. That alone makes you dangerous to the system. Even today, we see this in people like Pope Francis, a pope who broke barriers by washing the feet of prisoners, embracing the outcast, and choosing humility over pomp. He once said, "God is not afraid of new things." And neither are you. That's what scares them. You're not afraid of the unknown. You are the unknown walking in full authority. And because they don't understand it, they resist it. They try to pull you back into the box you never belonged in. They try to rewrite your story, clean it up, fit it into their theological checklist so they can feel safe again. But you were never sent to make them feel comfortable. You were sent to reveal what's real. Just like the prophets of old, your life is a living contradiction to dead systems, like Amos, the shepherd who prophesied against kings without religious credentials, like Mary Magdalene, who became one of Jesus' most loyal followers after being delivered from 7 demons, chosen not after she was clean, but because she was willing. You too carry that messy grace that makes religious minds unravel. Your existence demands they rethink not just you, but God himself. You are a walking theology lesson that says God does not need middlemen. You are proof that the Holy Spirit lives in truth, not titles. And that kind of freedom cannot be managed by man-made order. What if your authenticity is the very revival they've been praying for, but are too afraid to recognize? That's why they try to silence you. That's why they whisper. That's why your story has been distorted, diluted, even discredited, because you shine a light on everything they've refused to examine. You are not just a person. They see a movement in you. You are not just a testimony. They feel a tremor in their foundations when you speak. And yet, their resistance only confirms what heaven already decided. You were chosen to disrupt, to awaken, to free. You are not just being talked about. You are echoing. Your life is reverberating through walls built by tradition, fear, and false humility. You are the living reminder that divine favor does not require permission, polish, or pedigree. You are the spark in dry places, the voice in quiet rooms, the fire in old systems that forgot how to burn. So hold your head high. You were never meant to be understood by the old world you were sent to change. Your story isn't theirs to edit. Your light doesn't need a filter, and your truth isn't up for negotiation. You are not a problem. You are prophecy in motion, and that is why you will always be the hot topic worth talking about. Beloved chosen one, if you've made it this far, then you already know the truth. You were never just a topic of conversation. You were always the revelation shaking old systems, awakening hidden spirits, and walking proof that divine favor defies the rules of this world. They talked about you because you disrupted their silence. They doubted you because your strength broke their patterns. They tried to rewrite your story because you dared to live unfiltered, unapproved, and unshaken. You didn't wait for permission to shine. You didn't ask for a stage. You simply became the light. And every whisper, every judgment, every attempt to contain you was just confirmation of your assignment. Your journey exposed what others were afraid to face. That God is not a system. He is a spirit, moving freely, powerfully, and personally in those willing to surrender comfort for truth. You've been misunderstood not because you're wrong, but because you're ahead. You are not a reflection of their expectations. You are a reflection of God's intention. And yes, your name will continue to echo in conversations. But now you know why. Because you are living proof that healing is possible, that favor is real, that boldness is holy, and that obedience is undefeated. You were chosen not to blend in, but to awaken. So today, lift your head, walk boldly, keep shining without apology. And if this message resonated with your spirit, type 777 in the comments as a prophetic declaration that you are aligned, appointed, and anointed for such a time as this. To all of you who have supported this mission through Super Thanks, your generosity fuels the light that reaches thousands. Whether you give or simply watch, I thank you deeply. Your presence here is a blessing. If you haven't already liked this message, subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder that they too were never meant to fit in, but to break free. Let them hear it. Let them see you. Let them know they're not alone. Until next time, stay grounded in truth, wrapped in grace, and covered by the one who called you before you were ever known. You are chosen. You are rising. And the world will never forget the sound of your breakthrough. God bless you, abundantly, boldly, and beyond measure.